The first time I realized my life was built on a lie, I was staring at a black and white blur on a monitor, and smiling. That screen showed a heartbeat, tiny, flickering, full of impossible promise. Emily squeezed my hand beside me, trembling with what looked like joy. The room smelled faintly like antiseptic and printer ink, the kind of sterile calm that makes everything feel official, permanent. I was supposed to feel like the luckiest man alive. I almost did, because in that one moment I believed the hardest years were finally behind us. For most of my marriage to Emily, things hadn't been easy. Love existed, at least once it had, but it became buried beneath long hours, bills, exhaustion, and quiet resentment neither of us knew how to name. Construction work kept me away from home more than I liked. Emily resented that. I kept telling myself the financial stability would someday make up for the distance. She kept telling me she felt alone. Still, I believed marriage meant endurance. I believed if you stayed long enough, everything eventually healed. When she told me she was pregnant, she cried into my chest like the world had finally answered her prayers. I held her and thought, this is it. This fixes us. We started talking about the future again, names, paint colors, which room could become a nursery. She seemed lighter, kinder. For the first time in years, I saw genuine warmth in her eyes. And chama pop bob connectioned. Even the way she suddenly became protective of her phone, secretive with calls, or busy late some evenings. I ignored it all. I wanted to believe too badly to look closely. Hope is a powerful drug. It makes suspicion blurry. The clinic that morning, I sat there in borrowed scrubs while the technician moved the cold wand across Emily's stomach. I focused on the holding of her hand, the way her fingers squeezed tighter the closer we got to seeing the baby for the first time. The screen crackled into life, shapes shifted, the heartbeat pulsed, and then the technician said something not malicious, not dramatic. Just wrong. She made an offhand remark about gestational age, barely a sentence, but my brain slowed around the numbers. About 13 to 14 weeks along, 13, 14. According to our calendar, Emily had told me she was barely 10 weeks pregnant. Anyone else wouldn't have noticed. Anyone else might have assumed math errors happen. But I knew our dates. Construction scheduling trained me to calculate backwards and forwards on instinct. Time isn't fuzzy to me. It's exact. What? And I didn't say anything. I didn't interrupt. I just sat there smiling while something inside me went cold. Later, driving home, Emily chattered nervously about baby clothes and doctor visits and prenatal vitamins. I nodded at all the right moments. I even laughed once when she made a joke about how sleep was about to become illegal. But inside my head, a countdown had begun. When I asked what day she thought conception happened, she shrugged. Casual. Said stress made memory weird. I didn't press. People lie best when the questions are gentle. That night, after she went to bed early claiming nausea, I stayed awake in the living room watching late-night reruns with the sound muted. My thoughts ran in circles around one question: was the math wrong or was my marriage? I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself trust mattered. I told myself not to poison happiness over a few weeks' discrepancy. But doubt isn't something you can command to leave. It digs in quietly. 2 days passed, then 3. I began noticing things I'd previously dismissed. Her phone always face down. Notifications muted, sudden habits of stepping outside to answer texts. The credit card statements, tiny hotel charges during days she'd claimed to be visiting her sister. I hadn't even noticed before because I rarely checked details. Just totals. Ignorance wears comfort like armor. My sleep became thin. I'd lie beside her listening to breathing that suddenly felt foreign, like I was next to someone I didn't truly know. On the 4th night, I ordered a DNA test kit online, not because I was certain of betrayal, but because uncertainty was worse than pain. I told myself the test would fix everything. I'd discover the timelines were wrong, the doubts were paranoia, the cracks imaginary. We'd laugh about my insecurity. I told myself this because I needed it to be true. When the kit arrived, it came in a plain brown envelope that looked more dramatic than it had any right to be. I hid it in the garage cabinet behind old toolboxes, not because Emily snooped, but because confronting truth requires privacy. I collected my sample that night while she slept. Her sample came the next morning, snagged carefully from the rim of a coffee mug she left in the sink. I felt dirty doing it, criminal, disloyal, but loyalty means very little when reality is in question. The mailing process felt unreal, as if I were sending away part of my soul disguised as swabs and labeled tubes. Okay. Then came the waiting. Those 2 weeks stretched longer than any construction project deadline I'd ever known. I went through the motions of normal life, work schedules, site inspections, dinner conversations that skimmed safely over surface topics. Emily glowed more with each passing day. Pregnancy looked good on her, relaxed her edges, softened her voice. She talked about motherhood the way some women dream of escaping planets, as if this baby was finally going to make her whole. The better she seemed, the heavier the knot grew inside my chest. I prayed the test would put this to rest. I prayed for embarrassment. Embarrassment feels incredible compared to devastation. Gang. On a quiet Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was checking blueprints in the site trailer. The results had arrived. I stared at the message notification for nearly an entire minute before opening it. There was something ceremonial in delaying the click. The instinct to savor ignorance for the final seconds it exists. Then I read the words "Possibility of paternity by Van Ling." The numbers beneath confirmed what the headline already made brutally clear. I wasn't the father. The world compressed into a singular hum in my ears, a sound without shape. My hands felt disconnected from my body, as if they were working levers on someone else's nervous system. I sat down and stared at the monitor without seeing it. I didn't cry. Shock doesn't arrive loud. It settles heavy, quiet like dust after an explosion. Emily's name. Our late conversations about baby strollers, colors, names, every moment rewound under a new filter, performance. I went through the rest of the day numb, gave directions I didn't remember giving, drove home on autopilot. She greeted me with a kiss that night, and I returned it because the habit of affection hadn't yet died. She cooked dinner and chatted about ultrasound pictures she wanted to frame. Inside, I was dissecting timelines, connecting dollars to hotel charges, replaying odd behavior I'd chosen not to see. The revelation didn't make me angry the way movies suggest betrayal should. It made me still. And stillness deeper than sadness, the kind of stillness where something in your identity goes quiet forever. She talked about the baby. I nodded. She rested her head against my shoulder, the weight of trust she hadn't earned. I stayed calm. Because rage is dangerous when it arrives too fast, I needed to see the full picture. That night, lying beside her in darkness, I made the quietest decision of my life. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontations announce intentions, and I wasn't ready for mine to be known. Instead, I would wait, watch, collect truths the way I'd learned to collect evidence in job site disputes, silently, the Maikashin Churstafor, patiently, without tipping the other side off. Because if the baby wasn't mine, then this betrayal wasn't new. And I needed to understand how deep the lie went, and who else was swimming inside it. So I closed my eyes beside the woman who thought she had fooled me, and began preparing to learn who she had chosen over her husband. Knowing the truth didn't make my world explode the way betrayal stories promise it will. There was no shouting, no smashing things, no tear-soaked collapse on a dirty bathroom floor. There was only silence. A thick, endless silence that settled into my bones like winter. Every morning after the DNA results, I woke beside Emily the same way I always had, listening to her breathe, watching the subtle rise and fall of her chest while my mind replayed a single sentence. I am not the father. She would stir and smile at me when I pretended to wake, unaware that everything she believed secure was already dissolving. I still kissed her forehead before work. Still listened to her talk about nursery paint swatches and prenatal yoga classes. Still touched her stomach gently as if I were bonding with the child growing there. It disgusted me that I could perform normalcy so well, but I had learned something vital. Rage makes people sloppy. Grief makes them blind. Patience makes them invisible, and I needed to be invisible. I stayed quiet for days, then weeks, letting the shock digest into clarity. Only after my emotions dulled into focus did I allow myself to begin working, not to confront the lie, but to map it. Betrayal is rarely a single mistake. It's always a network. Emily was careful, more careful than I gave her credit for. Her phone never strayed from her side. Messages were deleted routinely. Her call logs were empty. But the habits were there, a slight nervousness when notifications buzzed, the way she repositioned the screen when sitting beside me, the instinctive reflex to silence calls she didn't answer near me. I didn't touch her phone at first. Instead, I followed paper money never lies, not convincingly anyway. I started reviewing our joint bank statements with a microscope. Over time, patterns emerged that hadn't registered before: gas charges in unfamiliar towns, Restaurant bills nowhere near our commuting paths. Short hotel stays replaying on specific weekdays. Not vacation hotels, business hotels, places meant for discrete afternoons, not memories. Okay. The cover stories appeared immediately: lunch meetings, visits to my sister, errand days. Each transaction told a truer story than the words ever had. It became routine for me to copy dates into a notebook hidden at work, cross-checking charges against the days Emily claimed to be occupied elsewhere. The overlaps were damning. Then I found the phone, pure accident, the kind that only happens when you're looking without looking. Okay. I was cleaning the garage when one of the storage cabinets jammed. Jolting it loose caused a forgotten tote bag to spill out, old gym clothes, makeup wipes, and tucked between two folded towels. Like a cell phone, not sleek like Emily's everyday device. This was older, pay-as-you-go style, wrapped in a protective matte case with no personal identifiers. Fully charged. She hadn't used it that day, which meant it was waiting. I didn't open it immediately. Okay, I waited until late that night when Emily fell asleep beside me, curled protectively around the pregnancy pillow. Then I slipped quietly from the bed and retreated to the garage with the phone, no lock code. My chest tightened as the screen came alive. Message threads, familiar emojis, flirty shorthand. Dozens of exchanges hidden from the life she shared with me. One name appeared again and again: Derek. The messages burned when I read them: compliments, jokes, sexual anticipation disguised as humor, conversations that spanned months. Ruck and I, even early pregnancy days, were full of messages. There was no shame or hesitation, only excitement. Okay, what hurt most wasn't the content, it was the longevity. This wasn't some emotional slip or drunken accident. It was orchestration, routine, a relationship. Derek wasn't only the father of the child, he was Emily's carefully disguised second life with a steady control I didn't realize I possessed. I photographed every exchange. I copied contact metadata, screenshots, timestamps, everything. Then I turned the phone off and returned it to the tote bag exactly as I'd found it. I wanted her comfortable. Careless people reveal more than cautious ones. From there, the investigation became personal. Derek Hale. The name dug into my mind until I gave it form. And Emily had mentioned him once months earlier, a former coworker from Marketing who transferred offices and then conveniently vanished from her stories. At the time, the mention faded into the background noise of life. Now it became the epicenter. El Enkag. A few internet searches brought his profile into shape: 34 years old, divorced, recently terminated from the same corporate firm Emily still worked for. Social media posts painted him as confident, social, meticulously curated, gym photos, smart suits, smiling wine glasses at restaurants that matched some of the receipts I'd already tracked. Okay. He lived 20 minutes from our house. Not far, Turin too near, not far, too near. I drove past his apartment first before doing anything else, the way an animal cautiously circles unfamiliar territory. The building sat on the edge of a shopping complex, with underground parking and tinted balcony railings meant to simulate privacy. That first drive didn't include confrontation or confrontation fantasies, only surveillance. I began following Derek. Never directly. Never obvious. I observed patterns: the times he left the apartment, the vehicles he used, his typical destinations. He favored a downtown gym early mornings, Italian takeout on Wednesdays, downtown bars Fridays. He wasn't cautious. Confidence robs people of discretion. Through observation alone, I learned things about Derek that Emily never knew. He was massively in debt. Student loans still gnawed at his lower credit scores. Divorce settlements had cut his assets thin. He lived flashier than he could afford: leased car, luxury clothing, dinners he couldn't budget sustainably. Appearances were everything to him. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became. Derek was insecure beneath the polish. And insecurity makes men reckless. I kept mapping details with silent efficiency: credit reports, digital footprint scans, legal filings. One night, I discovered outstanding corporate allegations tied to his dismissal from Emily's company. Not proven theft, but strong suspicions. Unresolved investigations, unfinished fires leave ash trails. Emily didn't just fall for a coworker. She had attached herself to a man already skating on thin ice. One night, I followed Derek into a quiet bar, chose a booth out of his direct line of sight, and listened. He drank excessively, talked too much after 2 glasses of whiskey. Men like Derek crave admiration, and bartenders learn to stroke ego better than therapists. I heard him brag. Heard him mention a married woman laughing. Heard him say Hashination mentions married woman laughing. Heard him say the baby locked her down. He laughed when he said it. Something crystalline shattered inside me then. The baby wasn't a mistake to him. He was leverage baster pay paper than trap, sherber, buy a matrel tree colorations to copper mend, 4 inferred 9, 5, shreked. It was leverage. The betrayal deepened into comprehension. Emily hadn't just cheated. She'd painted me as a placeholder provider while profiting from another man's involvement. She saw the pregnancy as her parachute, away from the marriage. All paths led through deception. Over the following weeks, I collected everything, receipts photo-logged, Derek's financial instability traced, workplace misconduct rumors archived, bar recordings captured quietly when his drunken bragging crossed into confession. I learned of his second relationship, another woman believing Derek was single, unaware she shared him with a married expectant mother. I learned how he manipulated sympathy to fund lifestyle debt, playing charming romantic while leaving unpaid balances behind him like breadcrumbs. As I watched his world from the shadows, one horrifying truth became clear. He believed himself untouchable, that arrogance would eventually undo him, but my confrontation still did not come. Not yet. Instead, I remained the devoted husband. Emily never questioned my calm, mistook it for forgiveness before offense. She grew subtly careless, explaining absences with less detail, taking calls openly beside me without leaving the room, trusting that my quietness meant blindness. It was the greatest mistake of her life because clarity had replaced my fury, and clarity is strategic. I now saw something they didn't know. Emily and Derek were both accumulating lies while standing atop crumbling foundations. And the moment pressure arrived, neither had the emotional fortitude to survive it. All it would take was the right nudge, the right exposure, the right mirrored betrayal to fracture their alliance. I began developing something new, not a confrontation, but a choreography, and a plan designed not to attack, but to let the truth attack for me. Because destruction is most beautiful when enemies pull the trigger on themselves. When I laid next to Emily night after night, pretending comfort while my mind organized evidence, one thought hardened into certainty. They had no idea how visible they were. Every lie leaves fingerprints, every secret creates witnesses, and soon I would begin letting those secrets meet each other. Silence became my greatest disguise. Every man who has ever been betrayed believes anger will expose the liar. It actually reveals their nature as patience. Lies cannot breed without constant motion, and eventually the one telling them becomes exhausted from dancing. I stopped dancing with Emily. I was still physically there, still cooking together, still attending doctor appointments, still sharing the same bed. But emotionally, I withdrew piece by piece. My eyes lost the light she once recognized. My tone became neutral. I no longer asked about her day or followed her stories with practiced sympathy. When she noticed the shift, she misread it completely. She didn't suspect truth. She suspected weakness. The first visible change came through control. Emily began monitoring my schedule, checking in more frequently. When will you be home? Why are you working late? Subtle at first, but increasingly sharp. I recognized it immediately, not jealousy, but fear. My quietness unsettled her. Uncertainty made her restless. Secrets need stability to survive. She had just lost hers. I watched the pressure reshape her personality in real time. She had once been naturally warm. Now she snapped at small inconveniences, micromanaged household tasks, grew argumentative over trivial finances. Every unspoken tension erupted somewhere else, misdirected anger seeking relief. Meanwhile, I became a silent mirror. The more uncontrollable she became, the calmer I grew. That bothered her. Still, I pretended ignorance. Still nodded thoughtfully when she complained about coworkers or pregnancy discomfort. The more emotional chaos she displayed, the more confident I felt myself becoming, because chaos reveals truths methodically. She began making mistakes. One night she took a call in the bedroom while thinking I was asleep. Her voice dropped into the soft cadence reserved for intimacy. I didn't move, only listened. She whispered plans. She whispered finances. She whispered worry. I can't stay much longer. After the birth, everything changes. I committed every word to memory without moving an inch. And after she ended the call, I pretended to stir and roll away. She slipped back beside me with a sigh heavy enough to carry guilt. I slept cold and clear-eyed that night. Following weeks brought carelessness. She forgot to hide documents from the home office printer, pages related to real estate assessments, legal consultations. I copied what I found and placed everything exactly back where she assumed it went unnoticed. Yeah. She grew increasingly defensive about the house. My lawyer says mothers almost always keep the home when kids are involved. She said this casually once over dinner. That word lawyer didn't slip by anymore. And privately, I searched property assessment filings tied to local firms. Sure enough, a law office consultation had been billed to her personal card weeks earlier. And she hadn't merely thought about it leaving, she was planning it structurally. She wanted the house my house. Yeah. Purchased long before marriage, renovated with years of sweat capital, my emotional anchor turned bargaining chip. Okay, and worse than the property grab, she was planning to paint me as unstable. Spreadsheets she kept saved onto cloud storage recorded incident dates, days I'd worked overtime or withdrawn, emotionally reframed as bouts of mood irregularity. She'd written notes under them, describing fabricated tension and emotional distance. The implication was obvious, she would attempt to claim mental unfitness as leverage for full custody, and the baby, not mine, would be her shield. The realization didn't ignite fury. It birthed a cold clarity deeper than rage could reach. And she didn't just betray love, she intended to destroy my life for profit, but I said nothing. I did something far more lethal. I encouraged her, not directly, too obvious, instead, gently, suggestively. Like guiding someone to step closer to a cliff without telling them they're near the edge. Okay. When she mentioned legal advice casually, I expressed concern about her feeling stressed. Maybe you should write everything down, organize your thoughts, I suggested warmly. She looked almost relieved. That night, she began journaling obsessively, documenting grievances, trivial arguments magnified, innocent silences twisted into emotional neglect narratives. She was crafting a victim story, and I was letting her write the entire script, mad at her emotional state deteriorated. Paranoia set in. She became convinced Derek would abandon her once the pregnancy complications and public fallout began interfering with his lifestyle. I saw it unfold through frantic, hidden conversations. Her control efforts intensified. She interrogated me about finances, demanded we rework beneficiary paperwork and wills for the baby. Tried probing whether I'd taken life insurance policies out recently. She was setting financial foundations for single mother leverage. By contrast, I did not resist. I gently complied. Okay. I never outright questioned her decisions. I asked supportive questions instead. What's the best way to keep the baby protected? Do you think writing things down will help the courts understand? How should assets be organized for custody? Each prompt encouraged her to articulate more of her intent openly. The recordings I gathered stacked like bricks. Testimonies disguised as confessions, evidence generated effortlessly by the liar herself, and something else happened under the surface. Emily began to unravel emotionally. Lees chew away at stability. Guilt metastasizes into paranoia. She began checking my phone, asking if other women were texting me, accused me of becoming emotionally unavailable, projecting her actions onto me. Her anxiety spiked. Sleep became rare. Her temper shortened. She would alternate between affection and hostility unpredictably, some days apologetic and clingy, others bitter and accusatory. Manipulators fracture under prolonged stress when they feel losing control. I let stress finish her work. She slipped further. Late one evening, she drank wine despite pregnancy warnings, something she previously avoided religiously, and for the first time cracked completely. She ranted about unfairness, about how men never understand motherhood sacrifices, about how some people deserve more than others get. Her drunken spiral drifted dangerously close to admission territory. Using gentle responses, I coaxed deeper words from her, validating grievances without affirming lies. She said things that sealed her fate. Once the baby's here, the court will do the rest. The implication was unmistakable. Her own mouth had built the gallows. Meanwhile, my surveillance of Derek continued quietly. Emily became sloppier messaging him, arguments replacing flirtation. She accused him of distancing. He reassured her, but his doubt gleamed through weak responses. Their partnership was and every time they fought privately, Emily redirected that frustration toward me openly, seeking someone safe to emotionally dump onto. Her behavior accelerated into reckless territory. She forgot passwords, left conversations unsent but open. Dropped her burner phone into the garage by mistake once. I opened it again and found furious messages sent mid-argument between her and Derek over financial dependence. She had asked Derek to contribute toward legal expenses once custody proceedings began. He resisted. That was when cracks turned into fractures. She began to realize that while Derek helped create the baby, Like he never intended to help raise it. The relationship was imploding, and I let her burn. I neither confronted nor comforted, just remained steadily present. I let her believe I was emotionally drained rather than emotionally calculating. She believed my silence meant defeat. It was exactly what I wanted. The most dangerous moment came when she told me she might visit her sister for a week of pregnancy rest. She didn't realize I already knew her sister hadn't spoken to her in months. "I'll miss you," I said calmly, the same way men say goodbye before going to work. "Yeah." She hugged me harder than usual, guilt twisted through her body language, but resolve hardened too. This was her last preparation phase. The next stage would be execution, custody paperwork, house seizure, character assassination. She was nearly ready to move, and just as dangerous, so was I. She left for what she thought was her strategic retreat, unaware I wasn't following behind, but instead preparing the other side of the coming storm. For the first time since the DNA results, I stood alone in the house she planned to steal, surrounded by evidence she failed to hide, staring at paper trails thick enough to topple any courtroom lie. All the pieces were now lined up. Her unraveling had revealed not just infidelity, but conspiracy. She hadn't broken one vow, she had engineered my destruction, and engineering demanded an equally precise counter-design. And I didn't feel rage anymore, I felt ready, because silence had finished its job, the monsters had revealed themselves. And it was time to invite them into the light. When men believe themselves powerful, they stop checking their reflections. Derek was exactly that kind of man, polished confidence layered over careless ego. He wore his charm like an unearned crown, convinced intelligence followed image. And because of that, he never imagined the quiet husband fixing HVAC schedules and construction contracts was already dismantling his life from the inside. My first message to him was simple, casual, no accusation, no tension, just curiosity masked as politeness. "I found your name on an old company email thread, didn't know you worked with Emily, thought I'd say hi." Men like Derek love validation more than they love discretion, he replied within minutes. Friendly, flattered, confident. We met the next afternoon, a coffee shop downtown where polished professionals conducted half-truth conversations over espresso. I played the part exactly as needed, unassuming, self-effacing, quietly deferential. I made Derek comfortable. I asked his opinions, laughed at his stories, praised his marketing work with just enough admiration to feed his ego. I let him talk, and talk he did. Within 30 minutes, Derek was casually mocking his former firm for not appreciating talent, bragging about past relationships, framing himself as some misunderstood free spirit the world kept failing to recognize. I never once mentioned my marriage. I simply listened. Every sentence he spoke revealed more about him than Emily ever could. He craved dominance, needed to be perceived as smarter, more desirable, more influential. Being near men he believed weaker inflated him. That was the bait. We began meeting weekly, always casually scheduled. Always public, always friendly. I installed a discreet recording device, the kind small enough to vanish .net within my jacket lining, ensuring it captured everything while appearing harmless. Each conversation was carefully steered. I learned how to guide language without leading questions. The trick was letting Derek narrate his own foolishness. When he complained about dating struggles, I sympathized. When he boasted about women finding married men attractive, I nodded knowingly. When he joked about unexpected pregnancies ruining clean exits, I laughed softly and asked what he meant. Every confession arrived disguised as ego. Eventually, his arrogance pushed past conversational boundaries. He revealed details inadvertently. How long he'd been seeing Emily, when he first suspected the pregnancy might be his, how he couldn't risk public involvement, how the baby was her responsibility. Each phrase clipped neatly into recorded confession segments. Meanwhile, my second campaign unfolded quietly at home. I began planting doubt between Emily and Derek, delicate psychological scalpels rather than blunt lies. Emily would receive anonymous messages warning that Derek was boasting about their affair online. Derek would receive hints suggesting Emily was collecting evidence against him. Receipts, quietly forwarded. Send shots of innocuous conversations misframed as betrayal, subtle orchestration. Truth doesn't need fabrication, it only needs rearrangement. Emily confronted Derek over the phone more often. I overheard the fracturing tone through walls thin enough to carry despair. Derek grew defensive, accused Emily of paranoia, claimed he was being watched. Soon they stopped trusting each other enough to confide openly. A fatal blow for conspirators, divide loyalty, and synergy collapses. They became isolated islands connected only by resentment. At one coffee meeting, Derek drunkenly revealed fear for the first time. I think she's planning something. She keeps bringing up courts and lawyers. His voice trembled where ego once thrived. I comforted him like an ally. Women anxious get like changes. Probably doesn't mean anything. I watched relief flood his posture. Men rarely notice when the shoulder they cry on sharpens into a blade. Days later, I arranged coincidence. Emily ran into Derek outside a pharmacy while I ensured distance visible. Proximity, enough for her to notice me, observing without hearing details. And she went rigid. That night she accused me of spying. I responded calmly, sowing paranoia without confession. You know how your mood's been lately, seeing things where none exist. She recoiled. I watched doubt erode her confidence. Soon, both lovers believed the other was playing an independent game, and fear traveled faster than honesty. Derek began slipping, drinking excessively again, arguing publicly with the other woman he was secretly dating. Emily spiraled deeper, documenting imagined betrayals into her journal with escalating obsession. Unstable partners create unstable testimony. And I was shaping witnesses out of their own madness. During one of our meetings, Derek finally verbalized what ego had resisted. She says her husband doesn't know. But men always know, they pretend they don't. I met his gaze. Yeah, I replied slowly. Men pretend. That was the first moment I saw genuine discomfort touch him. I didn't dismantle his illusion then, I waited. Instead, I asked gently if he did find out what would happen. Derek scoffed. He couldn't do anything. She keeps everything documented to paint him unstable. Courts always side with mothers. The irony tasted sweet. Because his words mirrored exactly the recorded evidence built against them. Over subsequent weeks, Derek began slipping more, speaking openly about finances, debts, legal worries. He admitted to modifying expense reports at work once. Another confession logged. He hinted at stealing proprietary contact lists. Another confession logged. His downfall was expanding far beyond infidelity now. Every reckless syllable became a nail, sealing a coffin he didn't know he was inside. When paranoia reached its apex, I began withdrawing, sudden unanswered messages, missed meetings, delayed responses. Derek's anxiety exploded. Emily, already unraveling, interpreted my emotional distance as abandonment, accelerating her desperation. She began attempting heavier manipulation on me, affection alternating with aggression. Her mask was peeling, and underneath lay panic. She confronted Derek again, not over cheating but over loyalty, whether he planned to support her or leave her stranded. He refused. Their bond officially fractured. They were no longer allied, only adversarial witnesses tied to the same unspeakable truth. And I held the keys to every locked door. One night, Derek confided something final in our last conversation, voice cracking with frustration. She used me. Now she wants to ruin me to save herself. I nodded empathetically. I know how that feels. It was the closest thing to truth I'd spoken aloud to either of them. After that meeting, I erased myself completely. No texts, no follow-ups, just empty silence. The absence grew louder than presence ever had. Both Emily and Derek now believed they were being maneuvered by unseen threats, neither knowing the other had already been neutralized mentally. Fear dismantles alliances faster than exposure ever could. And as they began preparing defensive positions against one another, I began preparing the final executions of truth, because the trap wasn't about confrontation, it was about timing. Not immediate impact, but controlled collapse. I never rushed the collapse. Pressure must reach the perfect temperature before metal bends. For weeks I maintained complete silence toward both of them, not pulling strings openly, but loosening the knots just enough for tension to do the real work. By the time I moved, paranoia already ruled their decisions. Each believed betrayal was coming from the other. Each prepared counterattacks. Neither considered the quiet man they had erased from relevance. When fear runs high, truth looks like guilt and guilt becomes evidence. Emily triggered the first fracture herself. Months earlier, she and Derek had quietly filed an insurance claim for a neck injury she never suffered. Paperwork. Connected to staged reports following a supposed car incident during one of her midday errand visits. Derek's industry connections had guided the submission, promising a modest payout, enough cash to cover legal retainers and moving expenses without drawing attention. Okay, they believed the system blind, they were wrong. One anonymous package sent to the insurance review board reopened the claim with a surgical efficiency that even startled me. PDFs of time-stamped location data, receipts showing Emily shopping 40 miles away during the supposed injury appointment, phone metadata placing Derek near the accident claim address minutes after paperwork submissions, all dragged into daylight together. Even better, the documents included selectively edited screenshots of their burner phone messages, legitimate, unaltered, and devastating in combination, where Derek joked about easy settlement money. And Emily complained that fake whiplash still hurts my conscience. Insurance investigators don't consider conscience evidence, they consider fraud motive. Emily received the call while standing in the kitchen pouring orange juice, her glass shattered in her hand. Blood pooled on the tile she never noticed. Again, by the time she finished speaking, her voice sounded hollow, the sound of panic collapsing inward. Within 48 hours, her employer placed her on unpaid suspension pending investigation. The following morning, 2 insurance adjusters demanded medical verification documentation she could not produce, and Derek fell next. But not the same way. His accusations landed harder. Corporate theft, that was the claim. Anonymous tips flowed into his previous employer's HR department, alleging he'd stolen proprietary client data upon departure. Accompanying the tip were spreadsheets matching internal records, metadata logs showing transfer timestamps, and the most damning of all, embedded message conversations where Derek openly referenced contact lists downloaded from internal servers. Messages that were real conversations that occurred but never framed as admissions until now. Derek was summoned to a disciplinary hearing he believed meaningless, until security escorted him inside instead of into a conference room. By the end of the week, subpoena notices followed. His apartment lease was flagged under credit default review. In Prague, his personal accounts froze once online merchant complaints tied to past disputes resurfaced. All orchestrated through the cascading exposure dominoes that financial institutions set into motion. When men built on debt lose stability, everything cracks. The lovers blamed each other instantly. Emily accused Derek of betraying her insurance scheme, believing he'd tipped investigators to protect himself. Derek accused Emily of leaking the messages, assuming her paranoia drove her into exposure. They stopped communicating discreetly. Now they fought loudly. Voice messages turned venomous. Text threads burned with desperation. Threats replaced intimacy. Each believed the other had moved first, and neither realized they were both wrong. Emily stormed into the apartment Derek rented, screaming accusations loud enough to draw onlookers from adjoining balconies. Security staff intervened. Police reports followed Derek's other girlfriend, uninformed until the spectacle, discovered the truth publicly that day. She left him on the spot, taking with her his last personal anchor. Emily collapsed further. Her employer's suspension shifted toward termination once the insurance investigators notified corporate legal that workplace resources may have facilitated her fraud. Her pregnancy no longer protected her position, colleagues withdrew, friends disappeared, even her sister stopped returning calls. Isolation is a ruthless accelerant. At home, Emily unraveled rapidly. She screamed at me sometimes about nothing, about broken appliances or dusty shelves, until tantrums dissolved into sobbing apologies an hour later. I never rose to the bait. The more serene I remained, the angrier she grew. She began suspecting betrayal from me. Her paranoia scattered wildly now, accusing me of spying, cheating, or secretly conspiring against her. I maintained the same posture. Concerned, detached, non-reactive fear always gravitates toward the calmest target, hoping to provoke reassurance, but reassurance disarms suspicion, and I was past shielding her from the truth. Derek, meanwhile, attempted salvation through destruction. He contacted Emily from new throwaway numbers, alternating pleas and threats, demanded she recant. She responded with accusations of sabotage. Desperation set in. They began subtly manipulating each thinly veiled threats dangling over their interactions, warnings that past mistakes could surface if either pressed too hard. But the leverage was gone. Everything they could use against one another had already been exposed. Financial strain followed swiftly. Emily's legal consultation funds dwindled while handling insurance disputes. Derek began liquidating personal items, small possessions first, then more significant assets as debts mounted. Their struggles, once private, slowly became visible. Words turned sharp. Emily told fragments of her story to friends, painting Derek as negligent. Derek shared his own version, framing Emily as calculating. Both narratives contained truths, just not the ones they intended. The conflict became a matter of procedure rather than emotion. Police reports, court citations, and formal documents replaced whispered arguments and tense coffee shop meetings. The lovers who had once skirted around reality were now strangers navigating hallways lined with fluorescent lights. I watched it all silently. Emily, living under the same roof, changed visibly. Stress took its toll. She lost weight, slept little, and became absorbed in endless mental rehearsals, preparing defenses and scenarios out loud while doing mundane chores. Her dissent was quiet, unceremonious, and unmistakable. This was never about vengeance. It was about balance. She had threatened my future. I was only reclaiming it. Eventually, Emily reached out, a trembling attempt to reconnect. Words like maybe we can start over and maybe Derek was a mistake floated between us, but they were empty. She wasn't seeking love, she was seeking stability, a lifeline in chaos. Survival without clarity or honesty was just another illusion. Derek's unraveling mirrored hers. Threatening messages, desperate attempts to find allies, and growing isolation left him exposed. Eventually, formal charges surfaced, spreading across public records and professional networks. Even without judgment, reputations are fragile, and his had shattered. Emily read one article quietly, disbelief shading into realization. She whispered, "He ruined me," unaware that the real source of her collapse was different. When I finally spoke, calmly and firmly, she paused. This didn't come from him. Her posture stiffened. For the first time, the truth had a weight she could feel. The breaking point came quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday. Not a scream, not a dramatic collapse, just the silent fracture of a life under relentless pressure. I found her on the nursery floor, surrounded by half-painted walls and an unfinished crib. The room, once full of hope, now mirrored the weight of what had been lost, and the subtle, quiet devastation of what remained. She sat cross-legged, clutching a hospital blanket in her hands, an item she must have brought home from Dutch, an appointment folding and unfolding the fabric as if the repetitive motion could anchor her to reality. Her eyes looked hollow, not defeated, just unmoored. The collapse had finally outrun the lies fast enough that she had nowhere left to hide. And when she saw me in the doorway, something in her posture shifted, relief colliding with desperation. For the first time in months, the act was gone. She lunged forward and grabbed my sleeve as if I were something solid in a drowning room, Ryan. I can't do this alone, her voice cracked. Not with confession, but with fear. For weeks she'd blamed Derek. For days she'd blamed the world. Now, she blamed the future. I sat down across from her on the nursery floor. The silence stretched until she filled it. Can't you? She spoke in fragments, apologies layered over excuses, promises built on instability. She said she'd been confused, vulnerable. She claimed the affair was just emotional at first. She said Derek never meant anything. She said she chose me. I let her talk. Confession without interruption deepens truth. Then she changed strategies. She told me she needed me, not as a husband, as shelter. She said she couldn't raise a baby alone, that courts were ruthless, that reputation had turned everyone against her. She promised she'd do anything if I stayed. Therapy, transparency, rebuilding. Her hands trembled as she held mine. Pleading now. I know I messed up, but the baby deserves stability. We can fix this, Ryan. We can start fresh. Her eyes searched my face like statements wanting confirmation. I studied that same face I had loved once, now etched with fear where affection once lived. There's something you need to hear, I said. She froze. Nyline you need to hear, I said. She froze. I pulled the small audio recorder from my jacket pocket and placed it between us. She didn't recognize it yet. My voice remained level. I know about Derek. Her breath drew sharp, but she attempted denial out of instinct. What? No, I continued calmly. I know about the burner phone in the garage, the credit cards, the hotels, the insurance scheme, your lawyer visit, the custody leverage plan, the therapy notes you were fabricating. Her grip fell slack against my hand. Every lie she ever told collapsed into that silence. Her mouth opened, words forming, but nothing emerged. She began shaking. You are going to leave after the birth, take the house, paint me unstable, claim full custody. Tears streamed now. Nampere Bersumberg tears force up the stream now, but these were different devastation rather than performance. It wasn't like that. I leaned forward slightly. Not angry, final. Cain. She swallowed hard, realizing deception was now pointless because discovery ruled the room. How long have you known? She whispered. Long enough. Silence stretched further than the distance between breaths. She began sobbing openly then. shoulders trembling violently. I was scared, Ryan. I didn't want to lose everything. You were never scared of losing me, I said softly. Now, the words struck harder than shouting ever could. Egat, she verbasch confidence, schersabada noblischer, percum is apavinaras erdis en fam. She loosened completely, crumbling emotionally. What? Manipulative confidence remained draining from her posture. Okay. For several moments, the only sounds were her sobs. Then I pressed the button, static hissed, followed by a male voice. Derek's voice, recorded weeks earlier during one of our friendly meetings. She says her husband doesn't know. But honestly, he's clueless. The kid's definitely mine. She's planning to take the house and make him look unstable so the courts fast-track custody. I just went out without paying child support. Emily stopped breathing, and her eyes locked on the recorder as if it were a weapon aimed directly at her memory. Terror slowly eclipsed the shock. I pressed another clip. She filed the injury claim on my advice. Easy payout, quick cash. I told her how to write it so it wouldn't get flagged. Another clip followed. And I don't want anything to do with the baby. That's her problem. But leverage is leverage. Each confession stacked mercilessly. Emily's sobs dissolved into hollow quiet. Her face drained of color. Every truth she had tried to avoid was now undeniable, confirmed by the one person who could speak it with authority, the man she had chosen instead of me. I paused the recorder. I don't have to tell anyone what you planned, I said quietly. Her head snapped up. Desperation flared. Please don't. I'll lose everything. You already lost everything, I replied. She sank against the nursery wall, voice barely audible. What do you want? The most dangerous question a liar can ask. I wanted the truth exposed. Not revenge, I said. She barked, an unsteady laugh. This is revenge. No, I corrected calmly. This is balance. I stood slowly. You believed silence meant weakness. Her eyes followed me. But silence is a strategy. I explained what was already inevitable, that independent investigations, audits, and witness accounts would reveal the truth, that her attempts to manipulate outcomes had been doomed long before any trial, that Derek had no support left, that I would not shield her from the consequences. I didn't threaten, I didn't gloat, I simply stated the future. She fell inward, quieter than I had ever seen her. I walked to the door without looking back. Her voice called faintly. What about the baby? I paused. That child deserves a life built on honesty, she whispered. Eno and us, there is no us, not bitterness. Just truth. Truth. Closing the door, the nursery's pastel silence swallowed her sobs. Leaving that night felt like stepping into light after wandering a cave. Behind me lay betrayal, deception, and shattered plans. Ahead, justice waited and had emotionally crumbled, but the courtroom had yet to witness the truth. The courthouse felt cold and formal, echoing footsteps, polished floors, reflecting faces too tense to meet one another, broken only by murmured consultations and cautious optimism from lawyers bracing for the storm. I arrived alone. That mattered. No entourage, no performative support, just quiet readiness. You can't. Emily sat at the petitioner's table with her attorney, eyes hollow, posture practiced but unsteady, fingertips pressing white against a legal pad she hadn't touched. Derek sat on the defense side, suit rumpled, confidence dissolved into disbelief. Weeks ago, he had moved with swagger and careless certainty. Not today. Today, reality waited. The judge entered, and proceedings began like ritual, sterile formalities concealing the emotional weight beneath. Emily's attorney opened with theatrics, portraying me as emotionally distant, unpredictable, uninvolved, a husband supposedly capable of destabilizing custody. I remained still. Character attacks only wound when the target bleeds uncertainty. I did not. And when my lawyer rose, the room shifted. Her tone was calm, precise. Your Honor, she said, we do not contest emotional flaws. We contest lies, and we have proof. Exhibits appeared, bank records tracing questionable transactions, logs revealing hidden communications. Murmurs spread across the courtroom. Emily's composure cracked. Then came the recordings. The courtroom speakers came alive, carrying the truth that had been quietly waiting, now undeniable. Derek's voice rang out, confident, crude, utterly damning. The kid's, she's gonna wipe him out in court. Every word echoed louder than the gavel ever could. Emily broke, sobbing audibly, her attorney grasping for composure. Even the judge's posture stiffened slightly, the distinct tell of unfiltered disgust. Testimony followed. A senior auditor from Derek's corporation took the stand, confirming internal theft tied directly to offshore transactions Derek implemented using Emily's legal guidance. Emails, wire data, compliance investigations already closed. Emily's attorney tried objections, but the evidence was ironclad. Then witness after witness dismantled the image of star-crossed lovers until nothing remained but two collaborators cheating both law and marriage. Custody deliberation lasted less than 30 minutes. The verdict fell blunt, efficient, inevitable. Emily lost residential rights. Supervised visitation only pending psychological assessment. Marital assets returned fully to my name due to provable financial manipulation. Emily's fraudulent insurance case, now officially in the hands of prosecutors, she didn't look at me. She stared forward. At a future she never imagined losing so comprehensively. Derek's turn came swiftly. Once court adjourned, his wife, summoned after receiving forwarded recordings, waited near courtroom doors alongside. Media representatives already tipped by investigative reporters following his corporate scandal. She didn't shout, she only stared at him like a stranger who'd murdered trust with a smile. Then she handed him divorce papers, reporters circled, community connections evaporated, church board membership revoked by day's end, employment terminated before sunset. The man who had swaggered his way into adultery walked out carrying only a wrinkled briefcase of career ashes. I didn't speak to either of them. There was nothing left that words could improve or poison. Justice had spoken, louder than I ever could. Outside, sunlight washed the courthouse steps. I paused there, listening to normal sounds, resume, traffic, laughter, a child calling to a parent, life continuing, unstoppable. I exhaled. For the first time in years, the breath felt deep. Relief wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Like a heavy weight lifted all at once. I walked away not with triumph, but with freedom, not restored, rebuilt. Emily and Derek remained behind inside history's wreckage, bound to each other by shared destruction, holding remnants of a future they tried to steal by breaking me. Broken. They thought I was broken, but I wasn't broken. I was waiting